Numerous reports indicate that manufacturing has emerged as the favorite target of ransomware groups and hackers. In response, a new report from Industrial Media discusses the evolution of industrial cybersecurity, its current state, and the tactics hackers are using, including phishing schemes, malware, and ransomware attacks. It also details solutions in arming manufacturers with the knowledge and resources needed to win more fights on this highly complex and ultra-competitive battlefield. Download the industrial sector's new battlefield by going to manufacturing.net/cyber. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. In our 80-plus episodes of Security Breach, we've detailed exploits, discussed new vulnerabilities, assessed threat groups, and talked about tools ranging from artificial intelligence to attack simulation. But what continues to surprise me is that regardless of how complex the attack, or how organized the hacker, or how advanced the tools and tactics being used are, the security solution usually lies in very fundamental practices. The blocking and tackling of cybersecurity, or what one guest on the show recently described as the unsexy work of cybersecurity, continues to be the most important. So while you might think you already know about segmentation strategies, framework development, asset visibility, or enhanced access controls, it's these things that get overlooked and then exploited by hackers. Remember, Colonial Pipeline was the result of old credentials. So was a recent Boeing hack. And more recently, residential and commercial building control supplier Johnson Controls was the victim of a $50 million ransomware attack that emanated from out-of-date encryption on billing software. Once inside, hackers were able to snake their way to 27 terabytes of sensitive data that resulted in a huge section of the company's IT infrastructure completely being shut down. It's the evolution of these little things that our guest for today's show likes to emphasize in helping to keep the OT environment secure. With that in mind, we're pleased to welcome Brian Deken, Commercial Manager of Cybersecurity Services at Rockwell Automation, to the show. So, hey, Brian, thanks so much for joining us here on Security Breach. Really appreciate you taking the time. Just to kind of kick things off, leveraging your experience with the industrial control systems, and we've seen a lot of this getting more and more attention lately, especially with all the water treatment facilities that came out with the PLC hack and some other things along that line late last year. Really be interested to get your take on what are you seeing as some of the bigger areas of vulnerabilities that you guys are coming across and working with customers throughout the industrial sector?
Yeah, thanks again for having us here, Jeff. It's a broad spectrum. There are customers on every end of this journey, just getting their hands around the number of vulnerabilities that you have in this environment. You mentioned water and critical infrastructure. The aging infrastructure that exists in those environments poses its own challenge, and the fact that the people that want to attack that environment for a number of reasons can find the vulnerabilities and get into those systems. So what we're seeing is that there has to be this awareness, and there's this visibility and the need for visibility. And from there, you can start to make decisions. Once you understand your attack surface and the entire threat landscape, that's where we're able to start to have better and deeper conversations with our customers and think about what to go do next. And that's really what everyone's asking. They're not asking, what are my vulnerabilities? They're saying, what am I going to do about my vulnerabilities? And then once you have the exposure to the visibility and awareness around the vulnerabilities, then you start making the plans from there.
What do you think is driving a lot of that? And that's a great point. We hear that a lot, too, on the show. What's driving that? At least now there's a recognition of, I know what I don't know, and I need to know more about things I don't know about. Is that just coming across because there have been more high-profile attacks lately? Is this just sort of a natural next step in the whole IoT phase? Or what's the thought there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think there's, like, anytime anything gets momentum, it's usually a great number of things. The news and the news cycles certainly heighten and raise awareness. The world today, a war in Ukraine, right? Iran, Iraq, China, Syria. The names keep on going, and so when that's a daily occurrence, that's awareness. The other part of this is there's been a a reason to digitally transform for a while. IT, OT convergence, digital transformation. The world is flat with Ethernet now. The idea that you can make decisions from your phone while you're on vacation, regarding your operation, is not necessarily new, but the idea of taking advantage of it has exploded. And in doing that, that's raised and heightened awareness. The idea that we've gotten more secure in other areas has certainly raised the awareness. My capabilities to defend my environment have become greater. You don't hear and see much of this in the banking industry anymore. Simply they've installed multi-factor authentication, right? Dual factor authentication. And so I think they've gotten more stringent on policies and procedures for password changes. So there are these things. The other part of this is the government is now involved, specifically here in North America, in Europe with standards like NIST, to the recognition that NIST and the awareness of NIST and the evolution of NIST to NIST 2.0 and governance within, but regulations that stem around disclosure. If you're a publicly held company, as of the middle of December, that recently, you have 72 hours to disclose whether or not you've had a cyber incident. And so investor awareness, board level awareness, fiduciary responsibility, you couple awareness with government interaction, with the news cycles, it brings it top of mind very quickly.
Now, you bring up a ton of great points there. I want to circle back on a couple of them. The last one you're talking about, there's much more regulatory involvement, especially in Europe. We're seeing it now really on the financial element, like you talked about with a lot of the SEC rulings. I'd like to get your opinion here. Some people are saying we don't want as much government involvement. Other people are feeling it's necessary and vital in order to really hold people accountable. What's your take there? Is there a sweet spot in terms of the level of government involvement?
I almost feel like you're going to have some level of government involvement. It depends on how far we want to go, right? Too much is probably too much, and too little, like we've had in the past, seems like it hasn't been able to drive the action. I'm not sure government involvement will drive the action. What drives the action is raising awareness around responsibility. There's been some instances before where public utility companies have experienced attacks, and the consumers of that utility could come in and sue the utility. There's no way that a utility could absorb the amount of customers they have in their customer base suing them. So what are you going to do? Bankrupt the utility who you get the power from? The circle of this is absolutely mind-blowing and crazy. And so we've got to come to some recognition and willingness. And if it needs to be through some level of regulation and maybe through some level of public funding as well to solve some of these issues and problems, that may be an okay thing for us to figure out.
Well, and I think regardless of the route we take, what it's really about is a transparency. Just being forthcoming with a lot of these things, because as you alluded to, it doesn't just affect things internally, it goes way beyond that. And the hackers know that, and they use this extra pressure for ransom or whatever their nefarious purposes are. How do we balance that? Or what's been your experience in the right way to balance that? We know some of these larger companies, they've got a lot of things to worry about in terms of exposing their supply chain, worrying about their stockholders and everything else that can come into play. But they also have a responsibility as a good corporate citizen to say, this is what happened to us. Here's how we want to make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else. Again, I'm asking you to walk a tightrope a little bit there. Is there a sweet spot that we can find to balance all of those really important priorities and needs?
Yeah, I don't know if we've been able to find the sweet spot just yet, Jeff. It's what I do know is customers of ours in many, many different sectors, the public sector, critical infrastructure, manufacturing sectors, no matter what sector it may be, those who have taken a level of action and paid a level of detail to being vigilant around securing their environment and their operation have been successful. Yeah. I'm not going to say that cyber criminals are lazy by any means. They're well funded in most regard. They're ahead. They are ahead. of any defender, and any given attacker in any given environment can be successful. No, nobody is completely foolproof and has all of the answers, but we've also not made it very difficult. And that's what I mean by some of the change in the sector and coming into the manufacturing environment now. I think most of the people who have been good at this, ransomware gangs, cyber criminals, nation states, whoever it may be, found that it became extremely difficult to try to get into the finance world here, right? Finance has done this. The IT side of the world has done this to a large degree. You can come into the IT side, move into the OT side, and have your way, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a matter of doing just a little bit more, and maybe that's not what we've all taken steps to go do yet, is that little bit more. I'm talking about some of these things that don't cost any money. Changing passwords, like, we ship our material from Rockwell Automation, and so does every other vendor, with a default password. And I can't tell you how many times we've asked customers right in front of them, do you still use the default password, and have you changed it yet?
Yeah. Well, that was the Boeing hack, right? Basically, a lot of default passwords that were still left in place from a supplier. Wasn't even Boeing directly. So it's crazy how those little things can just kill you.
Just dormant user accounts. I mean, there's numerous acts of just almost sheer blatancy of just, what is our responsibility and policy and procedure. But I get it. When we work in an operational environment, we're worried about the operation, and the skills gap is real. Jeff will probably get to this as well, but this skills gap around who in an OT environment can do this, right? We have electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, process engineers, maintenance people, operations people running factory operations, running the critical infrastructure operations, and they're not cybersecurity professionals. They have to be skilled up in cybersecurity, and again, that's an awareness thing just as much as anything else.
Okay, let's go right into that, talking about that definite gap we have in terms of the OT security specialist. You mentioned a lot of things we try to borrow from IT. By now we know it's not a cut and paste. You can't do that. So what have you seen be successful? Is it going outside the organization? Is it training from within? We've talked to a lot of people who found a great resource in former military personnel. What have you experienced in terms of trying to just get some of that OT experience in-house?
Yeah, it's probably just about everything. A lot of folks are going to have to solve the problem the same way that IT solves this problem, managed services, right? That's been a big bright spot for us. The folks who we work with, have lots and lots of different options and choices who they work with from their managed services providers. The technology itself has provided a great resource and a great bridge the gap between the lack of skills, but that also poses its own challenges as well. The technology in and of itself invites new challenges. But yeah, people from the military, people from 2-year degree programs. I was talking to my son. He has a great interest in playing video games. Big surprise. My kid plays video games, but look, he understands. He's taking programming classes in school. Why not take cybersecurity certificates? They're right there available for you. So being able to certify folks in this space without having to have large, long 4-year degree programs where we're all taking geology and history to go get a cybersecurity degree. Like, let's get to the point. Massive skills gap. It pays well. Let's get people interested in the field and get them in these environments. And so we're at the precipice, right? We're at the early stages of what it's going to take and how we go find new resources in these fields. Which is also a good thing, right? I mean, if we want to look at a silver lining around some of this, it's that we're creating jobs, and we are creating problem solvers. They're solution providers.
Absolutely. That's an interesting take. I mean, that approach, where it's sort of a get to the point type of education, has been very successful in the trades. We've seen how that's helped address a lot of those deficiencies, a lot of those openings there. Applying that to cybersecurity might be a great way to go, especially when you look at sort of the dynamic or the demographics of a lot of those who have become very successful in the cybersecurity realm. Very focused on what they're doing from a technology perspective and a problem solving, a little bit of a combative element to them as well. Why not give them the information and let them go? It makes a lot of sense.
Real world experience. They can go get plenty of it right away.
Yeah. One of the things, Brian, that I took away from our conversation at Automation Fair are actually the two things that you seem to really prioritize, being segmentation and establishing good frameworks around cybersecurity. Let's be honest, they're not the sexiest, most exciting topics, but you've been they're close to you, and there's something that you reinforced a lot when we were discussing, as well in some of the presentations that were going on there. Maybe you can just reinforce, because I know we've got a lot of our audience going, I know what that is, I've tried doing that, or I am doing that, but it's evolving just like everything else. I think that's kind of what you reinforced to me. So maybe we could talk a little more deeply there about why you're so committed to those two things in particular.
Yeah, there's several things that I'm committed to, and our business is committed to, and customers should be committed to. The reason we're committed to it is because it's a combination, and it's a combining of standards and frameworks. No matter if it's NIST 2.0, NIS 2 in EMEA, others, it could be a very specific ask from a very specific sector. There's pipeline directives, right, for critical infrastructure. And you can go down into the 3.2.4.1.a section or whatever it may be, right? And it's going to say something. It's going to say, to me, one of four things usually. It's going to say, segment your networks. It's going to say, identify your asset base and the vulnerabilities and prioritize them. It's going to say, you need real-time threat detection because your asset base is constantly changing. The vulnerabilities are constantly evolving. The complexity of the threats are constantly changing. So you need some type of real-time threat intel. And it's going to say, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you need a respond and recover plan. So the four pillars, table stakes, whatever you want to call it, segmentation fits squarely into that conversation. And the evolving segmentation, when we look here in North America and even globally at standards like IEC 62443, it's now evolved into IEC 62443 and recently -3-3. And you're talking about areas that you may not be able to segment and areas that you may not be able to patch and you may not be able to even see in real time. And how do you mitigate those risks? What are the other factors you can use? Strategies like defense in depth come into play. So it's this combining of frameworks, standards, practices. NIST 2.0, I applaud the evolution of it around governance. Governance has to exist everywhere, and especially the idea that policy and procedure exists. And what are you going to do and how are you going to do it is a great way to approach your cybersecurity plan and your risk mitigation plans. So the segmentation piece, again, like you said, not necessarily sexy, and identifying crown jewel assets and patch management programs have to play into that. And again, it comes back to a tool set to identify your priority around your segmentation approach. But we've visited with a great many number of customers. Oh, I've got that handled. We have an IDMZ in place. Purdue model, layer 3.5 IDMZ. I'm sure you do, but something still happens. Something still happened. What was it? It might have been, did you use best in use? Did you use best in class? How were you able to successfully implement? Gartner uses a scale going left to right, 60% of organizations and in some awareness visibility phase, 30% in a firefighting phase, only 10% in the integration and optimization. I argue that the 10% that are in the integration and optimization didn't necessarily integrate and optimize it correctly. So you might as well go back to the beginning again.
No, 100%, because as you've alluded to a number of times, things are evolving and changing. And that's the biggest part I think about that people forget when establishing those frameworks, they need to be updated. When you establish that segmentation strategy, well, how many assets have you added since the last time that was looked at and revised? You know, not to get too far into it, but like the Johnson Controls ransomware attack that hit last year. It got in through a billing system. So you do wonder about their segmentation strategy, if they could have curtailed that and cut it off so it didn't get so far into their network. May have been a different dynamic. Who knows?
Well, something we do know is, there's a far greater number than 50% of OT attacks, ransomwares, incidents coming from the IT side. So
Yeah.
that speaks directly to your IDMZ segmentation, layer 3.5, how you separate an IT OT. But there's also an emerging thought process. I don't think it's new. It's probably been around for a long time, but I think in the conversations I'm having, it's an awareness around the fact that there are lines disappearing. And when you put everything again back on Ethernet, it's a flat world. It's all one network. Even if it's a bunch of different networks, there's hundreds of networks of protocols inside OT environments still today. This IT/OT convergence is probably still further out. I don't know if we're talking about Industry 4.0 or Industry 5.0 some days as well.
Yeah.
There are printers on networks inside of these factory floors that I'm not sure if they're running on ASCII text based
No.
networking or what anymore. But regardless, segmentation does solve problems that not necessarily other technology solutions and tool sets can solve. So it's a pillar. It's a table stake. It has to be part of the conversation.
Couldn't agree more. We've talked a lot about your thoughts and strategies and how you've worked with a lot of these companies. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the company that you work with, Rockwell Automation, some of the things that you guys are focusing on right now and have established as priorities for cybersecurity.
Yeah, here at Rockwell, our biggest focus is on how we can support managed services of the future, right? We're a big believer in the way that the IT world has done it and been successful with security operations centers. So Rockwell has stood up its own security operations center. I believe we're one of few very focused only operational technology security operations centers. Speaking about the Purdue model, layer 3.5, we don't go above the layer 3.5, and we don't necessarily want to be experts in the IT world. But those folks that have IT SOCs have IT analysts looking at OT data, and they're looking at IT data. So they're looking at lots of data. So how we can help customers contextualize that data is what we're looking at. So the number of data sources that we can ingest into our SOC, put that through known technology, SIM and SOAR technology, and then be able to analyze that with an OT lens, have OT expertise on hand in our OT analysts, and provide the playbooks to help our customers reduce a lot of the alert fatigue, a lot of the noise, a lot of the alerts and alarms. We're talking hundreds of thousands of alerts and alarms from sites down into single digits. Those are some of the use cases that we've been able to produce with that. So we have a big focus on making sure that we can ingest data from technology, put it through more technology, but use OT resources to contextualize it. And that's how we can provide very large outcomes in the end. I mean, it's been extremely valuable to work with our customers to understand what they need. And then even more so, this hybrid model, right? It's not necessarily about an IT SOC or an OT SOC. It's probably about both. And that comes back to people, process, technology. Do you want to use your people and our process? Do you want to use your process and our people and our technology? What is the combination of that? And that's starting to come into the conversation more and more. But having these capabilities and into the future is really where we're headed.
Yeah. Being at Automation for the last couple of years and seeing sort of those simulated attacks, that exercises that you guys run, pretty impressive and pretty cool to understand the dialogue that goes back and forth, the timeliness of it, the sensitivity of the different alarms and alerts and how they're customized according to the environment it was fun to watch. So very cool.
Yeah, it was great to have that there. It was a really coordinated effort, as you mentioned, between the technologies and the people and how we would work with our customers. But seeing that live really resonated for a lot of folks. We had upwards
Yeah.
of 10,000 customers there. And every time I walked by or was around the Security Operations Center booth, full house, packed crowd. So obviously the interest is there, and raising the awareness and bringing that level of visibility to everybody of what it looks like, how it can be done, was exciting for everyone to see.
Absolutely. Good news for the entire industry, really, to see that level of interest and awareness. You've brought it up a couple of times, Brian, so I got to ask, when we come to IT and OT, traditionally there's all this talk about breaking down silos, getting everybody to work together, all of that things. We know it's a priority. From your experience, how's the industrial sector doing? Are we getting better? Have strides been made there? Do we still have a long way to go? What's your take?
Yeah, Jeff, it's a great question. We probably could have, an hour-long conversation on
Yeah.
just this topic alone. It's all over the board, much like everybody else on every journey. The one thing I do know is the customers who I work with and I have conversations with, who have the highest and deepest level of OT cyber maturity and are the most resilient and are considered the most secure, also have the most organized approach between their IT and OT teams. They have the highest level of communications. They're in touch with each other. They understand each other's position, and they are working together as often as possible. I've run into certain organizations that even have named their initiatives around their IT/OT convergence in organizations. TITO, TITO backwards,
Yeah.
OTIT. So when they told me they had a TITO organization, I knew right away that they were working together. Other meetings, you get IT and OT in the room, you're happy to see that level of decision making
Yeah.
in the same room. But IT sits here on the left hand side, and OT sits on the other side, and they shake hands like they've never met each other, and you get a little bit of a chuckle out of that. And
Yeah.
it's all over the board. It's a must. And I think back to the point around NIST 2.0, governance can help bring some of that decision making together, because it's a must. The world is flat. The Ethernet, disappearing lines,
Yeah.
necessarily not having a 3.5 layer with an IDMZ. You got to make those decisions and make those choices as a team.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that IT and OT and bringing them together, I think they need to start understanding the hackers know about this divide too. They know that there's this division and that there's not as much cohesiveness in the way a lot of these networks and endpoint security is put together, which kind of leads into, you mentioned it a little bit in some of your first comments, talking about some of these state-sponsored actors that are really growing now with the conflicts that we see all over the place, maybe especially in Ukraine, especially in Israel right now with everything that's going on. These folks like to call themselves hacktivists in what they're doing. They think they've got a real moral drive behind what they're doing, but they're essentially laying a blueprint for anybody else to attack a lot of these really vulnerable but essentially important systems. We mentioned water treatment, but it's been other stuff too. Is there anything we're learning from a lot of this state-sponsored activity? Or is there been some takeaways where we can see this was done, we've learned from our mistake here, now we're better as a result of it? Anything like that that's come across your radar?
Yeah, it as damaging it is for any
Yeah.
company to experience an attack. It opens eyes and it creates more awareness. And I've never seen more engagement from a higher level of customers than I've seen right now today. So again, back to some things we've talked about, is this combination of the news cycle, the awareness, the fiduciary responsibility, rules, regulation, government involvement. I think it's all coming really to this head around massive amounts of awareness, and it, it's an awakening in a way, and a real attention that I haven't seen before. And this is no longer let my OT department take care of this and get some tools and go figure this out. This is board level stuff. This is the highest it gets. This is real prioritization. This is companies look at this like this is one of their pillars for existence, and
Wow.
that's the right way to go look at it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, when you're facing organizations that call themselves gangs, when they call themselves hacktivists, when they're state sponsored, they're extremely well resourced, they're extremely sophisticated in their techniques, they're well funded. They call it an APT, right? Active persistent threat. It's active,
Yeah.
it's persistent, and it's a threat.
Yeah.
And you put a number behind it, APT 28 being fairly well known and famous, it's going to continue to go on and on and on until there's some way to stop that. And it's going to take all of this effort around the combination of things. But the good news is I've seen a very heightened awareness and people taking it very serious about what it's going to take to go solve these problems and put an end to it, or at least make it much more difficult.
Yeah. I think that's the key. We want to take away all the low-hanging fruit. And a lot of things you talked about there, those conversations were not taking place 4 years ago in most industrial enterprises. So the fact that it is now is a huge step.
Yeah, it's right on it's on the doorstep of board members and C-suites, and even if you're a smaller privately held company, you have to take it extremely seriously, because those types of events could be the difference between whether or not you make it and you have a future. If you're a large Fortune 500 company, you can sustain $1 billion, hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps, in losses. It hurts like hell. I don't want to imagine it. But if you're a small manufacturer, one site, three sites, five sites, whatever it may be, you get hit with a few $1,000,000 of this, that there may not be much of a future. I mean, that could be the difference.
Well, I think that's going to become a much more prominent role throughout the supply chain as well. When you look at those big OEs, they're going to look at their tier 1, 2, 3s, not just in terms of their capabilities in providing product, but in keeping all their data secure as well. Because if they go down, they've got to find a new supplier, and who knows how that affects so many other tiers in that supply chain.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I didn't know if we would get to that or not, Jeff, but supply chain resiliency brought to light a lot of this as well. And not necessarily everybody thought of themselves as part of the critical supply chain. I mean, you are a critical supplier to your customer base. And so if your end customer comes back to you and says, I'm evaluating you as part of our critical supply chain, and you don't meet those requirements of what that customer and your end customers feel, it's not a government, it's not your shareholders, it's your customer telling you that you need to go ahead and enact this level of security, and this level of resiliency needs to be within, because this is part of the way that we work and we bring our product, whatever it may be, water, electricity, to market, regardless. That supply chain resiliency is a real thing.
So let me just throw a couple of buzz terms out here. You can either pass or offer your thoughts, however you feel comfortable. A big one that we talk about cybersecurity and really throughout manufacturing is artificial intelligence and AI. What are your thoughts there in terms of how it could be used for and against, I guess, cybersecurity?
Yeah, I had somebody ask me this the other day, and I don't have the answer I think most people are looking for. Seems like it should be something exciting. The truth of the matter is, AI is built into almost everything we're already doing in this world. That is the technology. That's the reason the term AI exists, is because the technology that's out there to go do this is AI. Now, how that evolves in the future is what's exciting. I'm not sure of where that sits. I know a lot of the technology partners that we work directly with have their minds on what's capable and how AI is going to make their tools even more best in class in the future. But the good news is that it is already inherent to a lot of the technology that exists in this space. It's actually on the leading edge of AI. It's how AI came to be, part of more of the masses here.
Absolutely. Another big topic that's getting a lot of conversation, and I think maybe it might be a little overblown, is people talking about the software bill of materials and SBOMs and how that's sort of impacting cybersecurity measures. What's your take on that one?
You must be reading my emails, Jeff. I think I had about 5 different SBOM emails today. I don't know. Rockwell Automation being a manufacturer, and our product security teams take SBOM extremely seriously, right? We have to know and understand who has access to to our code and how that's working and where'd that come from and how do we communicate that to our broader customer base. Look, I'm glad there's awareness around it. That shows another level of security, of heightened security awareness. Like the fact that people are thinking about that. No one asked me that question even a year ago. I had no emails on SBOM a year ago. I had 5 emails on SBOM today. So buzzword, buzz term, but like heightened awareness, how manufacturers going to figure that out? It's going to come back to people, process, technology. What are the tool sets? How do we identify it? How do we work with your suppliers? How do you work with a big, broad range of suppliers if you're an end user, a customer, critical infrastructure sector? It's another challenge. But I know as within our own product group, the way we approach it with a level of responsibility in the fact that our customers are going to ask us and challenge us around it, that's a good thing because that means we can live up to that level of responsibility that we have as a secure product company as well.
Thanks, Brian. And for more information on the work him and his colleagues are up to, you can check them out at rockwellautomation.com. Thank you for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Brian Deken, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.